let's start with some of what you took away from the spring. So if you had to give me a few of your biggest takeaways, where do you want to start?
Why don't we just start with a team that you wouldn't expect the headline and start with Illinois, which is those that know. And I think my big takeaway is Illinois is an absolute, they're absolutely a playoff contender. I think they could compete for a conference title. I don't think that's crazy to say. And I just think, even Michigan right now, because Sharon's unproven, beyond Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, like the stars kind of have to align for some of those teams to have a really, really special season. And last year was special for Illinois. And then you think about bringing back 18 of your 22 starters, all five offensive linemen. Altmaier is a top 5 quarterback in this conference. And if he takes another step, top 3, top 2, maybe number 1, I understand.
Dude, he might be a top 10 quarterback in college football this year.
Could be. We're a little uncertain at the wide receiver position. I know they brought in some transfer guys. They're excited about that group, but I think Pat Bryant is a stud, and that's going to be tough to replace. This feels like it has the makings of a special season, and I think Brett Bielema is a great coach, because when you have how you coach a veteran roster versus how you coach an unproven roster, that you can't be the same coach. And I think Brett Bielema is a coach where the locker room is behind him. You have coordinator continuity. Both your coordinators are back and have been there for a few years. I'm excited about Illinois. That's probably where I would start, Joshua, is that team has a chance to captivate the headlines, similar to what Indiana did last year.
I tend to agree with you on that. And I think more people are starting to talk about them seriously, which is a good thing. You mentioned Brett Bielema, and I say this all the time, but he's one of my favorite coaches to visit with in the Big Ten, because he gives great access and is an open book. But the way that he coaches, I think he coaches like the great ones do. And he's actually a guy we talked about earlier in the show. He talked about the time that he spent with Bill Belichick and how that informed the way that he thinks about his process and the way that he thinks about situations and the way that he thinks about practice plans. And you can certainly see that Illinois, for a team that's not going to be as talented as some of the contenders, they play in the margins as well as anybody in college football. So I do think that's an important thing. And people, feels like they've forgotten what he did when he was at Wisconsin. They had phenomenal years under Brett Bielema. And so I think the combination's right for them. We've seen now over the last few years, being veteran is important, but also having a coach who you feel like can get you there is important too. So they're kind of in that window right now of the combination of great coach who is going to do the things to put them in the best position to win, and also a veteran roster who's just going to have more experience than other teams that they face a lot of times.
Absolutely. And just to kind of stick towards the top of the conference, I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this, because I think Penn State is like the favorite or one of the favorites to win the national title, obviously alongside Ohio State, Oregon. That's going to be the big debate of, who's going to come out and win the Big Ten. And Penn State's certainly all in. I call it Ohio State's spring game. And, what Penn State has is the formula we've seen that works to win. You're bringing back a quarterback, you're 2 good running backs, you're bringing back some key pieces on defense. And yet I look at Ohio State, and that roster is so unbelievably talented. And I understand they're replacing guys, but they're replacing guys with the next generation of NFL players and the next generation of first rounders. That secondary has a chance to be one of the great Ohio State secondaries. That linebacker room is maybe the most athletic linebacker room in the history of Ohio State. D-line has a chance to take some steps, and I like some of the moves they've made in the transfer portal. Okay, you're replacing your quarterback, Joshua, but O-line may be one of the best Ohio State offensive lines we've seen in years, and no one has a deeper or more talented wide receiver room than Ohio State. So I think the quarterback play is going to be elevated by all of that around them. And whoever it is that's under center will get better as the season goes on. So it seems like Penn State is like the pick right now on social media and from fans to win the Big Ten Conference. But man, I think Ohio State reloaded immediately. I'm hesitant to pick Penn State because of the mental seed in James Franklin's head. I've yet to see them, beat the Buckeyes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Let's talk about Ohio State, and then I'll flip it over to Penn State. So I agree with you in the way that they have seemingly reloaded this roster, and it's not an uncommon thing to watch Ohio State do. But the amount of guys that left, it was like, how are they going to do it? Do you think the D line has enough though? That to me, they had 4 starters drafted. And that it's just that if you're not strong on the defensive line of scrimmage, on the offensive line of scrimmage, that can dictate how your season really ends your ability to win at the peak.
Yeah, I really think that's the ultimate question. And I think that they're particularly on the inside is the key. And I think their starters have enough to hold it down. The question is can they take the step and become elite? I think Tyleik Williams is going to be a stud in the NFL and is highly underrated. Ty Hamilton's a stud as well. So what can they get? But it's the question is can they stay healthy too? Because as we know, injuries happen in football. I think they're starting 4, particularly the starting 2 on the inside. They've added depth on the edge. Can they stay healthy and can they develop and take that next step is the ultimate question. But I'm not going into this season saying I expect a level of domination like what they had last year.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of there with you. And the Julian saying thing, I think will have a lot to say too. And he's well supported, as you mentioned, but how quickly he can get started because they got Texas very early in the season. It's going to be a tough one. I know Sark is all in on this year on winning, but I do think that outside of the defensive line, I feel generally comfortable about what Ohio State's putting out on the field for next year. So you mentioned Penn State, said we're going to get there. There's a mental side for James Franklin that everybody talks about. And I think, I don't know, I've come around on that in this way. People said Kirby couldn't do it, right? Alabama was the hump. Kirby was a great coach, but was he ever going to be an elite championship coach? And he did it. People talked about your old coach, Jim Harbaugh, Ohio State, right? Like, I'm going to win or die trying. And people thought that it might be the die trying part instead of the win for a very long time. And then he got over the hump when it came to that. Now, there was a Ryan Day conversation on the flip side of that, where it's like, dude's a really good coach, big games, we don't know if he can deliver. And then the Michigan thing happened. And now it's like, where are we when it comes to some of these great coaches? And it seems like if you give them enough time, if they're really an elite coach, they'll get it situated. So now we get to James Franklin, where the roster's veteran. They've done some work in the portal to get the wide receivers, which was very important. They needed to do that. But it's like, is Ohio State still going to be the thorn in their side? Is he going to get into that big game at the end of the season and they're just going to come up short, right? Mm-hmm. And so in terms of that conversation with James Franklin, do you think that given the inputs, given the roster, that he can actually get over that mental hump?
So I think there's some much more nuance to this conversation. Like, you can't just put it in a bubble and say every time Penn State lost to Ohio State, it's a failure of James Franklin. Because, like, just as we started this entire show with Bill Belichick, like, sometimes it's a talent thing. In most years, Ohio State is going to have a more talented roster than Penn State. But occasionally the stars do align, like Illinois, and like it feels like this year for Penn State is they're all in. And yet the question still remains, because even with Jim Harbaugh, the stars aligned for my team in Ann Arbor in 2016. Objectively, I thought we had more talent than the 2016 Ohio State Buckeyes, and we had every opportunity to win that game. But a couple key injuries, a couple bad bounces, and all of a sudden you're in a dogfight. What happens in those key moments? And Ohio State had proven to be comfortable in those key moments and ultimately won that game. Like that's the question to me, where I think finally the talent is there for Penn State and James Franklin, where they should feel good that, hey, objectively, they're going to have more talented position groups than Ohio State. They have the more proven quarterback right now, the more proven running back room. You have the highest paid defensive coordinator in college football that knows Ryan Day and knows that Buckeye roster. Like, this has to be the year, but I don't think it's going to be a blowout. This is going to be a close game. When you match them up toe to toe,
right?
What would happen in a close game situation?
Yeah, I think that's the question there. I want to reserve judgment because I've been wrong numerous times doing the can't do it thing, right? Like the guy just can't do it. I feel like this is going to be the year for me to really decide whether I'm going to be the can't do it guy or the inputs have to be right. And the coach is still doing his thing, guy. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of pressure on James Franklin, especially following up last season where they did make a deep run in the college football playoff. But once again, if the wide receiver room for them is better and the guys that they got in the portal hit, it feels like they should be as competitive as any of the top teams in the country. And they have one of the added benefits that a lot of these teams don't have, where Ohio State, we talked about quarterback question. What's quarterback going to be like? Texas nationally, Arch Manning, like, yeah, people like him, but it's a new quarterback. Georgia's dealing with a new quarterback. We're going to talk about Oregon here in a sec. I think we like Oregon, but there's still a question. Is the quarterback going to be any good, right? And they don't have that question. They've got the quarterback. They've got the running backs. They like the D line. All of the things have lined up here. So I'm going to be in wait and see mode and not say that I don't think James Franklin can do it. I've never seen him in this situation to be able to do it. This is going to be the judgment year for me.
It's not that it's and given enough time, I know James is capable of doing it. But boy, like you'd like it to be this year. Boy, would you like it to be this year. And we both talked about, like, we saw Drew Aller, a new version of Drew Aller late in that season. And he took strides that we hadn't seen with the limitations at the wide receiver position. So I'm excited for him, man. I'm excited for that part of the parity of the conference and another good college football season.
All right. So where are you at on Oregon right now? Because as I mentioned, Dante Moore, question there at quarterback. I think people are pretty high on him just because of the type of athlete that he is, but lack of experience. He took the gap year to learn, which I thought was really awesome on his part, but now it's time to kind of show up there. Dan Lanning is one of the more interesting names to me. I've talked about this with you and Nicole, where I feel like we might have given him a little bit too much credit too early on. This is not to say that I think he's a bad football coach. I do think he's a great coach. But we gave him a lot of benefit of the doubt without actually seeing the results that we maybe didn't give to other coaches. Or we've gotten to the point in his tenure where we've started to judge him as harshly as we judge other coaches. Very good, but that last game that they had against Ohio State in the playoff leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You start to look at some of the rivalry record, against Washington as he's been there. It's like, he struggled with that team at times. Is this a year where you think Dan Lanning is going to reload and they're going to be right back there in the conversation of being Big Ten champs once again?
Yeah, I also, that's why I like, in terms of like job desirability, Oregon's got to be one of the best places in the country because they have the resources to cut big checks. They have complete alignment from an NIL standpoint. And yet, even when they were the top ranked team in the country and undefeated, we were just not talking about them at all on a national media scale.
Glad to be there. And they don't have a national championship, right? And I think, like, this is not a hate on Oregon thing, but Michigan, Ohio State, places that we came from, like, everything's judged so harshly because it's like Michigan's got more wins than anybody. Ohio State, it's like every year it feels like they should win a title. And for Oregon, maybe their fan base is just a little bit more realistic about how college football is because they have not done the thing as much as some of the other storied programs have.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good indication if more people hated Oregon on a national scale. I think that would be a positive sign, because even when Oregon beat Ohio State, it was very little about congrats to Oregon and more about, wow, what a shame of Ohio State. That the story that had to tick them off a little bit, that the story was still Ohio State. But just to go back to your original question, that they're here to play today, tomorrow. They continue to recruit at a high level. They go to the transfer portal and have no problem adding key pieces from high level players. And that's just simply not going to change. They got a quality staff once again with complete alignment. The players love Dan Lanning. But I feel much more uncertain and nervous about Oregon's quarterback position in battle than I do about Ohio State's. In Oregon still has talent. They still have a good O-line. They still have weapons, but I still feel much more uncertain about who's going to be under center and what they're going to get from the quarterback position than I do from Ohio State. And that's ultimately going to decide it, because Dylan Gabriel was perfect for them last year. He was great in key moments, accurate, good decision maker, able to run. He checked every box. So I do expect there's going to be a drop off of quarterback play this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think even with the drop off, they've done a great job of talent acquisition. Say what you want about NIL. Not everybody's figured out how to leverage it the way that they have. And then for Dan Lanning too, like we watch with Texas A&M, you get all the NIL kids in there, and sometimes it doesn't matter. You actually got to be a coach. You got to be able to motivate them, and they have to listen to you and feel like they need to go out there and execute. And he's done a phenomenal job of getting guys to go out there and play with the program standards in mind. So I think there can be a drop off at quarterback for them, and they can still have a year where they're right there in the picture of being in the college football playoff.